Second Date by Bartau. Cat had met and taken in so many lovers over the years that he rarely recalled how he'd met them. He remembered many intimate details about them, their physical appearance, both before and after, the sound of their voice, the passion with which they made love, but it was an extreme rarity that he had ever recalled the details of where and how he'd met them prior to taking them home. James had been no exception. Brianna was an exception. The first thing that Cat had noticed about her was her resemblance to James. Her fur, while totally different in color, had the same general texture. Most people, even other rabbits, wouldn't have noticed such a detail. To them, her milk chocolate colored fur wouldn't have borne any resemblance whatsoever to James' fluffy white pelt. But Cat had an eye for such details. But even beyond the fur, there was her face. She was streaked with feminine beauty, but then James had been a bit effeminate himself, and there were so many features in common. More than you would expect from total strangers. Their eyes were practically a matched set, and their noses seemed to twitch in exactly the same way. And they were about the same height, almost 5 feet tall. Probably no more than a coincidence, except that Cat noticed the illusion of height augmentation from the long ears, how far they stuck up before they began lopping back down. And it was an amazing coincidence that their ears seemed to add just the same amount of height. About the only similarity that Cat didn't really consider significant was their ages. Well, apparent ages. He had never gotten Brian's age, but he currently guessed, but he correctly guessed it to be just 2 years older than James. It was because of all those similarities that Cat didn't act the least bit surprised when Brianna mentioned a great deal of concern regarding her cousin, James, an only child, quite a rare thing amongst rabbit families, who had gone missing 5 weeks previously. Not that he made any mention of ever meeting the now missing Lapine. After all, she never asked. Cat had initially written her off as unobtainable, if you will, at least at present. She was clearly close to her missing family member, almost like a sibling, and Cat doubted that she wanted to get involved in a relationship or even a one-night stand given her current state of mind. What a difference a few drinks can make. Not even hard liquor, just a few light drinks to lower her inhibition, and she quite willingly followed him home. Which, really, was what she'd planned to do in the first place. Not to find Cat specifically, of course, but to loosen up and relax enough to let her meet someone and have a good time and do whatever having a good time with someone might involve. James would have wanted that. He wouldn't want her constantly fretting. She'd done what she could to find him. She needed to allow herself some pleasant experiences, or she'd just sink too far into depression to escape. And now, thanks to this charming feline, she had finally forgotten most of the worry, the fear, the sadness that had claimed her life since her cousin's disappearance. And it really didn't take long for things to progress from Cat's living room to his bedroom. A kiss, a nibble on her toe, teeth lightly tickling the flesh, making them wiggle and curl. Brianna wasn't quite sure if it was the alcohol she consumed or Cat's natural charm that had her lying naked in his bed. Right now, she didn't much care, not so long as he kept up the work with his tongue. It was just at her toes for now, but each time the appendage would glide over her revealing digits, each time his lips suckled over and tickled her entire body spasmed for reasons she couldn't understand. If his tongue was this good at, oh my. A firm leg pressed against the sole of her foot, lips suckling against the soft, sensitive skin, spasms running through her body in response. Then was his tongue sliding along the underside of her foot, heel to toes. How well would he be formed between her legs? She would have to wait to find out, since Cat was currently just lightly nibbling at her ankle, barely moving onto her calf. The added suspense only heightened her excitement. He wasn't even working that telling tongue at her sex, and already it was tingling madly, soaked with juices. A series of light kisses at her calf. The feline mouth opened up over the thick flesh, and teeth lightly grazed along the skin as he suckled on her lower leg. It took more than 5 minutes for Cat to reach her knee and crawl up the thigh, and the building tension was already causing the young rabbit woman to buck her hips sharply. She reached between her thighs and firmly caressed her moistened sex, trying to temporarily calm the overwhelming desire that Cat let grow and grow through his slow, deliberate teasing. A firm nuzzling at her thigh, followed by another tongue tickling. His lower teeth lightly slid over the skin, making her shiver. He was only midway up her thigh, and it was all that Brianna could do to keep from firmly grabbing his head and shoving it into place at her crotch. Minutes passed. Cat's whiskers were barely grazing Brianna's mons, and that was enough to make her cry out from excitement. Her body was rigid. Strong lapine legs were wrapped around the feline body. Large rabbit feet pressed into Cat's back, toes curled and kneading into her lover's body. A feline tongue grazed a moist female rabbit's sex. Cat tasted sweet sexual fluids soaking her pulsating labia lips, and he simply lapped at them. His tongue simply tickled over the sensitive and wanting slit of his lapine lover without pressing in any deeper. Naturally, this drove Brian even wilder. She moaned and mellowed and panted rapidly. She rubbed over her lover's sensitive ears, trying to encourage Cat's purring. The vibration heightened her arousal to mind-blowing heights. She spread her legs, opening her sex up for her lover, desperately wanting him to push his tongue and his face in deeper. She got what she wanted though. Cat still moved at a deliberately slow pace. The opening of the rabbit's sex enticed the male feline to probe in slightly, tongue tip pressing in and licking along the slit to taste his lover's inner juices. Cat seemed pleased with the taste, so his tongue pressed forward for another go at it, delving in deeper this time to feel the warm folds of Brian's vaginal opening against his tongue, while his teeth playfully nibbled at her mons, tickling and stimulating her further. His tongue curled upwards, then drew up sharply, pulling against the swollen knob of Brian's clit, bringing it into reach of his lips, which slid over the puffy nubbin and sucked firmly. Brianna screamed. Warm fluids washed over Cat's face as his tongue flicked over the sensitive rabbit flesh currently pressed tightly between his lips. He felt his lover's hips buckling wildly, and he pushed his tongue inside Brianna's sex to feel her vaginal passage clenching and convulsing. He lifted his feline face up and licked his lips, leaving the trembling rabbit stuck at the height of her pleasure, waiting for it to wear off somewhat before he dove back down again. Then he repeated the process. 15 minutes passed. 15 minutes of Cat licking, suckling, nibbling, and teasing. 15 minutes of Brianna screaming, writhing, gasping, and convulsing in ecstasy. It was over now. Neither the rabbit nor the feline believed that they could handle another minute. Neither spoke for some time. Both were pretty well out of breath as it was, and the pleasant afterglow really didn't need any words. Cat occasionally turned his head to brush his nose against Brian's thighs, which were still well scented with her juices. Finally, wanting to better snuggle with his newfound lover, Cat slid up to rest his head against Brianna's, nuzzling the rabbit affectionately. Brianna broke the silence, feeling as though her lover deserved some compliment after giving the most intense experience of life. That was... She didn't get any further before Cat's mouth covered her own. The feline's rabbit juices spiked tongue pressing against hers as he kissed passionately and firmly. It went on for only a few seconds before Brianna forcibly pulled back and lowered down to kiss Cat's neck. Then she kissed his chest. Then she kissed his belly. Then Cat let out a gasp and closed his eyes, just enjoying the reciprocal oral pleasuring from his lapine lover. The female juicer, still coating his face, filled his nostrils as he felt her pleasant tongue slipping and sliding over his engorged member, her lips bobbing about the throbbing shaft, her mouth gulping at the spill of seed that followed within a few seconds. I'm sorry, that's minutes. And then they fell into blissful slumber. Well, Brianna did. Despite his exhaustion, Cat forced himself to stay awake, watching over his satisfied lover, preparing himself for one more surprise for this beautiful girl. Satisfied that she was sound asleep, Cat gently slipped his arms beneath her and lifted her up, carrying her out of the bed, out of the bedroom, and down the hall. The kitchen, Cat's kitchen, a massive, impressively stocked, custom designed monstrosity of a kitchen. Everything within was oversized: the sink, the oven, the refrigerator, everything. Well, oversized by most standards. For Cat's purpose, everything within was exactly the right size. Brianna fit perfectly inside the sink, the basin large enough to keep her from being crammed within as the feline, after putting on a pair of rubber gloves, began gently cleansing his slumbering lover. He had to be gentle. Usually he drugged those who were given this special bath, but Brianna was special. She was so peacefully asleep that Cat correctly assumed she would not waken after even through the application of the fur-loosening shampoo, or even the gently warm rinsing that left her completely bald and smooth skin in the sink. Witnessing the sudden and complete removal of fur from another is usually a shocking sight, creating disbelief that the former sight was of the same person as the latter, as the transformation is so stark. Not only is color and texture lost, but so is volume, as the loss of fur makes the body seem to shrink rather dramatically. Cat, however, had long since learned to recognize others by more than the features given by their fur. Despite Brianna's sudden baldness, he still recognized clearly the beautiful thickness of her legs, the gentle curves of her breasts, the sweet disposition of her face, and of course, the distinct scent of her sex. It was because of his familiarity with the before and after nature of recently deferred lovers that he spent no time dwelling on the rabbit's woman's new appearance. Instead, he cautiously dried her smooth skin off with a towel, then very gently laid her on her backside in a large roasting pan. Cheers. Now where were we? The pan, large as it was still smaller than Brianna's length. It really only held her from her head down to her buttocks. Cat had to lift her legs up across her chest, bending them at the knees, folding the young rabbit woman up. From there, the feline completed the awkward task of single-handedly bringing her arms around her knees and binding her wrists together securely. Brianna was moaning softly by the time Cat started lashing her ankles together, with the young lapine lass starting to steer at last. It says that. She wasn't terribly coherent. Unsuccessful attempts to move her arms and legs caused twitching and wiggling, but there wasn't any real risk of her suddenly breaking free. She didn't even really comprehend that she was trapped. At least, not yet. Why is it so cold? The kitchen's cool air against her now bare skin did help to rouse her a little faster than she might have otherwise. By this time, Cat had returned to her side. Minutes earlier, he had left to retrieve a large bag from his pantry. He gently stroked her sex lip with the index finger of his left hand, making her twitch and squirm even more. His right reached into the bag, grabbing a handful of the contents. "Shh," Cat whispered. "Just relax and let me work." By now Brianna had gone from confused to being slightly alarmed. She tucked her arms, trying to pull them back, but felt that her legs were in the way. She attempted to stretch her legs, but felt that her arms were holding them back. And she hadn't expected to wake up in such a restrained position. She was naturally a little concerned. "What's going on? Why can't I?" It says that. Her words were cut off when Cat's right fist suddenly plunged into her spread sex, shoving in the handful of stuffing. It was rather traditional mix, dried breadcrumbs laden with various special herbs and spices. Brianna let out a grunt then squirmed about uncomfortably as the dry mix irritated her sexual passage. She opened her mouth to again try and ask what was happening, but once more she felt herself suddenly distracted by an invading feline hand as she was filled with more stuffing. At least she was prepared to try again as soon as she felt Kat's hand withdraw. "What are you doing?" It came out rapidly as Brianna attempted to make her inquiry before she could be interrupted yet again. She attempted to make the query demanding, but the rather uncomfortable and undeniably distracting sensation of the stuffing mashed up inside of her sex, combined with an inescapable sense of panic at her current restrained position, tempered the attempt at implied force. Cat didn't answer right away. He slid his hand into the rabbit-spread sexual passage a third time, making Brianna writhe and squirm once again as more stuffing was crammed within. After pulling his arm free, he took the time to lick his fingers before finally giving a rather simple and short explanation. "I'm stuffing you, silly." Another handful went in. "Oh!" It says that. Brian didn't find the answer terribly informative, so she pressed the issue. "Why? Why are you stuffing me? What are you stuffing into me? Why did you tie me up?" Cat never ceased to be amazed at the silly questions he would be asked at this stage, but he always humored his guest and provided as adequate an explanation as possible. Between cramming more and more handfuls of stuffing into Brian's increasingly tightly packed sexual passage, he answered her question. "I'm stuffing ya, so I can cook the stuffing and eat it after it's soaked up your juices. And it's just normal stuffing mix, nothing special about it. Got some nice herbs in it, but the juices are what really give it flavor. And you're tied up so you don't move around when I get you ready." Brianna was having increasingly difficult concentrating on any one subject of deep concern as her sexual passage was increasingly filled with a dry and irritating mix. She tried to think of a response, but first realized that she would need to decide upon a statement to which to respond, and even then something beyond what Kat had said was troubling her. She tried to put a finger on just what that deeply troubling matter might be, but her concentration was broken every few seconds when Kat's hand once again pushed deep into her. Finally, as the feline seemed to pause in his work, the rabbit realized the problem. "Why am I bald?" Cat was, at that moment, peering inside of Brian's stuffed sex, and her question was accompanied by a new wave of squirming struggles. Fortunately, the feline had already finished his assessment, deciding that his rabbit lover was filled up as much as needed. He slid his index and middle finger along the labial lips for a moment before finally realizing that he had been asked another question, and so, in a spirit of politeness, he answered honestly, "Well, among things, it makes it easier to apply the sauce." The answer was less than affirmative to Brianna, who had no idea what the sauce might be, much less where it would be applied, why it would be applied, and just why she had to be bald for it. Admittedly, though, a little thought would have answered two of those questions for her, but she figured matters out quickly enough when something cold streaked up along her left thigh. She let out a shriek in surprise, and her whole body spasmed from the shock. "Aye!" It says that. "What is that? Stop! What are you doing?" Cat wasn't exactly pleased with Brianna's sudden wiggling and writhing about, but it didn't make sliding the basting brush along her bare smooth skin too difficult, so he didn't ask her to stop. It probably wasn't something she could have easily helped anyway, seeing as how the thick gooey mess that he was lightly smearing on her left leg and then her foot, soon to be followed by the other foot and right leg, was still quite cold after being pulled out of the refrigerator. He was a bit engrossed in his work though, and didn't quite notice the question when it was first asked. In fact, it wasn't until he was smearing the sticky mix on Brianna's buttocks that he noticed her insistence on being debriefed of her current predicament. "Yeah!" It says that. "What is that stuff? It's cold!" Cat responded with a silly and not entirely sane grin. "It's the sauce, silly."